The new arrival David Chen pressed his palm against the observation deck's cool metal surface, watching the transport shuttle dock with Meridian Station. Another routine personnel exchange, another group of researchers rotating through their deep space assignment. As the station's lead systems engineer, he'd seen hundreds of arrivals over the past 3 years. But something about today felt different. The airlock cycled open with its familiar hiss. The new arrivals began filing through. The checkpoint. Humans, mostly, with a few familiar alien species he'd worked with before. Then she appeared, and David's breath caught in his throat. She was unlike any Nexori he'd encountered, where most of her species carried themselves with confident grace. This one moved with hesitant steps, her large violet eyes darting nervously around the station's corridors. Her skin held the characteristic blue-silver shimmer of the Nexari, but it seemed to pulse more softly than usual, creating subtle patterns across her slender form. She wore the standard research uniform, but somehow it looked different on her. More fitted, more alluring. First time seeing a Nexari female? Chen? Lieutenant Rodriguez appeared beside him, grinning knowingly. "I've worked with Nexori before," David replied, not taking his eyes off the newcomer. "Not like her, you haven't." "That's Zalera, the xenobiology specialist. Word is she specifically requested assignment to this station." David watched as Zalera completed her check-in procedures, her movements graceful, despite her apparent nervousness. When she looked up, their eyes met briefly through the observation window. She immediately looked away, a faint blush coloring her silver-blue cheeks. "She seems shy," David observed. Rodriguez chuckled. "Don't let that fool you. Sorry, females are never what they appear to be." Strange disappearances over the following weeks, David found himself increasingly aware of Zalera's presence on the station. She worked in the xenobiology lab on Deck 7. Just 2 levels below his engineering section, during shift changes, he'd catch glimpses of her in the corridors. Always moving quickly, always alone. Unlike other researchers who socialized in the common areas, Zalera kept to herself. She ate meals in her quarters, avoided group activities, and spoke only when necessary during briefings. Yet David noticed she had a way of being present whenever he was around, lingering in doorways, taking longer routes that happened to pass. His workstations, the first sign something unusual was happening, came. When his favorite coffee mug disappeared from the engineering break room, it wasn't particularly special, just a ceramic piece with the Earth Defense Corps logo. But he'd used it every day for 3 years. "Probably got recycled by mistake," Chief Martinez suggested when David mentioned it. "Supply requisition more. Cups if you need them." But then, other things started vanishing. His spare uniform jacket from his locker, a stylus he'd left on his desk, even a towel from the gym that he'd forgotten to take home. Small items, nothing valuable, but always things he'd used recently. The security log showed nothing unusual. No unauthorized access to his quarters or work areas. It was as if the items simply ceased to exist. The mystery deepened when David began finding replacement items in places he frequented. A new coffee mug appeared in the break room, identical to his old one, but somehow different, with a faint sweet scent that reminded him of exotic flowers. A stylus materialized on his desk, perfectly functional, but with an unusual iridescent coating that seemed to shift colors under the station's lighting. It was during a routine maintenance check in the lower decks that David stumbled upon the truth. A power fluctuation had triggered an alert in Section C7 requiring investigation of the backup systems. The area was rarely used, serving mainly as storage for non-essential equipment, following the power conduits through a narrow maintenance corridor. David heard soft sounds coming from behind a sealed access panel. Not mechanical sounds, but something almost musical, like gentle humming mixed with whispered words in a language he didn't recognize. Curiosity overrode protocol. David carefully opened the access panel and peered inside. The small chamber beyond had been transformed into something extraordinary. Soft, bioluminescent panels provided warm, amber lighting. The walls were lined with careful arrangements of familiar objects, his missing belongings displayed like precious artifacts in a shrine, and they're kneeling in the center of this hidden sanctuary. Zalera. She'd changed out of her standard uniform into something that looked more like traditional Nexari ceremonial dress. Its flowing fabric that seemed to move with its own inner light. Her silver-blue skin glowed more brightly than he'd ever seen, creating intricate patterns that pulsed in rhythm with her breathing in her hands. She held his missing coffee mug, cradling it against her chest, while speaking softly in her native language. Her eyes were closed, her expression one of intense concentration and what could only be described as devotion. David's sharp take of breath caused her to freeze. Her violet eyes snapped open, meeting his with a mixture of terror and desperate longing. David, she whispered, his name sounding like a prayer on her lips. The confrontation for a long moment, neither of them moved. David took in the full scope of her secret chamber, recognizing not just his missing items but clothing, tools, even food containers he'd used and discarded. Everything was arranged with careful precision, creating patterns that seemed to hold deep meaning. "What is this place?" he asked softly, not wanting to startle her further. Zalora slowly set down the coffee mug, her hands trembling. "You weren't supposed to find this? Zalera, what's going on? Why do you have all my things?" She rose gracefully, the ceremonial fabric flowing around her like liquid starlight. Up close, David could see that her skin patterns weren't random, but formed complex symbols that seemed to tell a story. "My species," she began, her voice barely above a whisper. "We don't court the way humans do." "What do you mean?" "When an Nexari female chooses a potential mate, she must first understand him completely, not just his thoughts or words, but his essence. The things you touch, the scents you leave behind, they carry part of your life force." David stared at her, processing this revelation. "You've been collecting my things because I chose you," she interrupted, her voice gaining strength. "From the moment I saw you in the docking bay, I knew. Your scent, your energy signature, everything about you called to me." The implications hit him like a physical blow. "How long have you been watching me?" "Since my arrival. I requested assignment to this station specifically because you were here." Her confession tumbled out now, as if a dam had burst. "I've studied your routines, learned your preferences, tried to understand what makes you uniquely you." That's stalking Zalora. Her skin patterns shifted, the glow dimming with what looked like shame. In human terms, perhaps. But for Nexari, it's the deepest form of respect.
Oh.
We only collect from those we wish to bond with completely. David looked around the chamber again, seeing it now not as a shrine to obsession, but as something more complex. The care with which everything was arranged, the reverence in her treatment of even mundane objects, spoke of something deeper than simple attraction. "What happens now?" he asked. "Now you know the truth." Zalara's voice carried a note of resignation. "You can report me to station security, have me reassigned. I won't resist. Is that what you want?" Her violet eyes blazed with sudden intensity. "What I want is impossible. I want to complete the bonding ritual. I want to share my life force with you, to become part of your existence as you become part of mine. I want things that would terrify any human." The raw honesty in her voice sent heat through David's body. "By me, David." His name on her lips carried warning and promise in equal measure. "I said try me." "What exactly does a Nexari bonding ritual involve?" Zalora stepped closer, and David caught her scent fully for the first time. It was intoxicating, like honey and starlight mixed with something purely alien that made his pulse race. "Complete physical and emotional integration," she said, her voice dropping to a husky whisper. "Sharing not just bodies, but life essences. When Nexari bond, we become permanently connected. I would know your thoughts, feel your emotions, share your dreams, and you would know me just as completely. Permanently, until death and beyond, if our shamans speak truly." David felt the weight of her words, the magnitude of what she was offering. "And if I say no?" Pain flashed across her features, and I complete my research assignment and return to my homeworld. The bonding urge will fade eventually, though it will leave scars on my soul. The chamber fell silent except for the soft hum of the station's systems. David looked at this extraordinary woman who had turned his ordered life upside down, who offered him something beyond anything he'd ever imagined. "Show me," he said quietly. "Show you what? The ritual?" What would it involve? Zalera's skin patterns brightened, hope replacing despair in her expression. "Are you certain? Once begun, the process is difficult to stop." David stepped closer, close enough to feel the warmth radiating from her skin. "I'm certain I want to understand." She reached out slowly, giving him time to pull away. When he didn't, her fingertips traced the side of his face with feather-light touches that sent electricity through his nervous system. "Begins with connection," she whispered. "Skin to skin, breath to breath, heart to heart." Her touch intensified, and David felt something extraordinary happening. Where her fingers made contact, he could sense her emotions, her thoughts. The desperate longing she'd carried since arriving at the station, the careful restraint she'd maintained, the raw desire she'd hidden behind shy glances. "I can feel you," he breathed, amazed. "And I can feel you." Her eyes widened with wonder. "Your curiosity, your excitement, your fear. You're not afraid of me, David. You're afraid of how much you want this." She was right. The logical part of his mind screamed warnings about unknown alien biology and permanent commitments to someone he barely knew. But his body and soul recognized something his mind couldn't process, a connection that transcended species and logic. "What comes next?" he asked. Zalera's smile was radiant and predatory in equal measure. "Next we find out if a human can survive bonding with a Nexari female." As she leaned closer, her lips nearly touching his, David realized his quiet life as a station engineer was over. Whatever came next would transform him in ways he couldn't imagine. The question was whether he was ready for that transformation. The first touch, David's answer came. It's not in words, but in action. He closed the distance between them, his lips meeting. Zalera's in a kiss that sent shockwaves through both their bodies. The moment their mouths connected, the world exploded into sensation. Through the kiss, David felt everything Zalera felt. Her surprise at his boldness, her relief that he hadn't rejected her, and underneath it all, a hunger so intense it took his breath away. This wasn't simple attraction or even love as humans understood it. This was a primal need that reached into the very core of her being. Zalera's hands gripped his shoulders, her fingers tracing patterns on his skin through his uniform. Where she touched, David felt warmth spreading through his body, as if her life force was seeping into his. "David," she gasped against his lips. "This is just the beginning. The preliminary connection. We continue. There's no going back." "What happens if we don't continue?" he asked, his voice rough with desire. Her violet eyes darkened. "For you, nothing. You return to your life, perhaps with some pleasant memories. For me, the incomplete bonding will cause physical and emotional pain that could last cycles." David pulled back slightly, studying her face. "You're saying you'll suffer if we stop now?" "The bonding process begins with first willing contact. My body has already started preparing for full integration. To halt it now would be like stopping in the middle of a necessary biological function." The weight of responsibility settled on David's shoulders, "So I don't really have a choice." Zalera's expression hardened, and she stepped back. "You always have a choice, David. I won't trap you with guilt or biological manipulation. If you walk away now, I'll find ways to manage the consequences. That's not what I meant." David reached for her, pulling her back into his arms. "I meant I don't have a choice, because I don't want to stop. But I need to understand what I'm agreeing to." Relief flooded her features. "Full bonding involves 7 stages. We've completed the first recognition and initial contact. Second stage requires complete honesty between partners." "What kind of honesty? Everything?" "Every desire, every fear, every secret thought. Nexari bonding creates complete transparency between mates. If you have anything you're hiding, anything you're ashamed of, it will be revealed." David considered this. His life had been relatively straightforward. No major secrets or shameful acts. "And you would share everything with me as well?" "Everything?" Her voice carried a note of vulnerability, including thoughts and desires that might shock you. "Try me." Zalera moved closer, her hands resting on his chest. From the moment I saw you, I've fantasized about claiming you completely, not just sexually, though that's part of it. I've imagined marking you so thoroughly that every being on this station would know you belong to me. Her words sent heat through David's body. Marking me how? Scent marking, for one. My pheromones would become part of your natural scent, advertising. Our bond to any other interested parties. It's physical marking as well. She traced patterns on his chest that made him shiver. Nexari females leave bioluminescent traces on their mate's skin. Beautiful, but unmistakable, so everyone would know we're together. More than together. Bonded, mated, permanent partners in every sense. Her voice dropped to a whisper. I've also thought about the physical aspects of our bonding. Nexari, sexuality is more intense than human intimacy. We don't just share pleasure, we share consciousness during the act. Every sensation you feel, I feel. Every thought you have, I know. David's breathing had become heavy. That sounds overwhelming. It can be. Some species can't handle the intensity. But humans, you're remarkably adaptable. Believe you could not only survive it, but thrive. What makes you think that? Zalora's skin patterns shifted into new configurations, these ones clearly indicating arousal. Your response to me so far. Most beings would have fled by now, terrified by the implications. But you're still here, still asking questions, still allowing me to touch you. She was right. Despite the alien nature of everything she was telling him, David found himself increasingly drawn to her, not repelled. What's the third stage? Skull. Preparation. My body needs to adjust to accommodate a human mate, and yours needs to adapt to bond with a Nexari. It's a gradual process, but it begins with extended physical contact. How extended? Hours? Days? Potentially? We would need to remain in close physical proximity while our bodies learn each other's biological rhythms. David looked around the hidden chamber. Here this space isn't suitable for extended bonding? We would need somewhere more private, more comfortable. Preferably with access to environmental controls. My quarters? Zalera shook her head. Public too easily monitored. Nexari bonding involves vocalizations and energy emissions that would attract attention. Energy emissions? Her smile was enigmatic. You'll understand when it happens. The question is, are you willing to proceed to stage 3? David studied her face, noting the hope and fear warring in her expression. This beautiful, complex woman was offering him something extraordinary, something that would change the fundamental nature of his existence. The smart thing would be to refuse, to maintain his human independence and simple life. But looking at her, feeling the connection that had already formed between them, David realized he'd already made his choice. Yes, he said simply. The preparation shillas. The entire body seemed to glow brighter at his acceptance. There's a place, she said, her voice excited. An abandoned research pod in the outer ring. I've been preparing it just in case. You've been planning this for a while, since my second day on the station, I told you. When a Nexari chooses a mate, we're very thorough in our preparations. She led him through a series of maintenance corridors he'd never explored. Moving with the confidence of someone who had mapped every inch of the station, the abandoned pod was in a section that had been sealed off after a minor hull breach years ago, repaired, but never returned to active use. Inside, David was amazed at the transformation. The sterile research pod had been converted into something that looked like a cross between a luxury suite and an alien temple. Soft lighting cast patterns on the walls, and the air was filled with a subtle scent that immediately relaxed his nervous system. How did you do all this without being detected? He asked. Nexari are naturally skilled at avoiding detection when necessary. It's a survival trait from our homeworld. She moved to a control panel and began adjusting the environmental settings. The atmospheric mix here is now optimized for both human and Nexari physiology. Temperature, humidity, and oxygen levels are all adjusted to facilitate bonding. David noticed that the space had been furnished with what looked like a bed, but one unlike anything he'd seen. It seemed to be made of some kind of bioorganic material that pulsed gently with its own light. Is that where we'll be staying? The bonding platform? It's grown from Nixari biotechnology, designed to support and enhance the bonding process. It will monitor our vital signs, adjust to our comfort needs, and help facilitate the biological changes we'll both undergo. The reality of what he was agreeing to hit David fully. Biological changes. As Ilora turned to face him, her expression serious. I should have been clearer about this earlier. Bonding with a Nexori isn't just an emotional or spiritual connection. It creates permanent physical changes in both partners. Enhanced sensory awareness, increased empathic abilities, extended lifespan, among other things. Extended lifespan. Nexari live for approximately 300 Earth years. A bonded human partner typically enjoys a similar lifespan, though the exact mechanisms aren't fully understood by your scientists. David sank into a chair, overwhelmed. You're talking about fundamentally altering what I am? Yes. Her honesty was brutal and beautiful. I'm offering to make you something more than human, and in return, you would make me something more than Nexari. We would become something new together. If I changed my mind after the bonding was complete, pain flashed across her features. The bonding can't be reversed, David. Once complete, we're connected until death. That's why I need you to be absolutely certain. David stood and walked to the viewing port, looking out at the stars. His old life, his human life, seemed suddenly small and limited compared to what Zillora was offering. But the magnitude of the decision was terrifying. How long do I have to decide? The preparation stage can last as long as you need, but once we begin the fourth stage, there's no stopping until completion. What's the fourth stage? Full physical bonding, complete intimate connection. Her voice took on a husky quality that made his pulse race. That's when the real changes begin. David turned back to her, struck by her beauty and the intensity of her desire. And you've wanted this since you first saw me? Before I saw you, I sensed your presence on the station before I even disembarked. Your energy signature called to me across space. That's impossible, is it? You felt the connection too, didn't you? Even before you knew what it was? David thought back to the weeks since her arrival, the strange dreams he'd been having, the inexplicable attraction he'd felt whenever she was near. I thought it was just physical attraction. Physical attraction is part of it, but only part. What you felt was the recognition of a potential bonding partner. Your human instincts recognized something your conscious mind couldn't understand. She moved closer, and David felt that same electric awareness he'd experienced in the hidden chamber. Show me, he said. Show you what? This connection you're talking about. If it's real, if it's as strong as you say, show me. Yes. Zillora nodded and placed her palms flat against his chest. Close your eyes and open your mind. The moment his eyes closed, David felt a rush of sensation that had nothing to do with physical touch. Images flooded his consciousness, not his own memories, but hers. He saw himself through her eyes, not just his physical appearance, but his energy. His life force, the unique signature that made him who he was. But more than that, he felt her emotions. The overwhelming attraction that had drawn her across space. To find him, the careful planning and preparation she'd done, the fear that he would reject her. And underneath it all, a love so deep and complete, it took his breath away. You love me, he said, opening his eyes. From the first moment, I sensed your existence. It's not just attraction or desire, but complete, soul-deep love. It's why the bonding is possible. It only works when both partners are capable of absolute devotion. And you think I'm capable of that? I know you are. I can feel it in you, the capacity for the kind of love that transcends species and logic. The question is whether you're willing to let yourself feel it. David looked into her violet eyes and saw his future reflected there. A future that was strange and uncertain, but filled with a connection he'd never imagined possible. I'm willing, he said. The discovery as if summoned by his words, the pod's proximity alarms began blaring. Through the viewing port, David could see security lights sweeping the outer ring corridors. Someone's coming, Zillora said, her skin patterns shifting to colors David hadn't seen before, indicating alarm. How is that possible? This section is supposed to be sealed. Not sealed enough, apparently. She moved quickly to the control panel, shutting down the atmospheric modifications and dimming the lights. David, if we're discovered here like this, there will be consequences. What kind of consequences? For you, disciplinary action for unauthorized access to sealed areas. For me, immediate reassignment off the station and possible charges of attempting to bond with a human without proper authorization. David's blood ran cold. Authorization? Interspecies bonding requires approval from both species governments. It's regulated because of the permanent nature of the changes involved. You didn't have authorization. Zalera's expression was defiant. I couldn't wait for bureaucratic approval. The bonding urge doesn't follow political timelines. The security. Sweeps were getting closer, their lights visible through the pod's ports. David made a split-second decision. Can you make it look like a routine maintenance inspection? What do you mean? I'm the chief engineer. I have authorization to inspect any part of this station. Help me make this look official. Zalera nodded, quickly activating several diagnostic systems and pulling up maintenance records on the pod's displays. By the time the security team reached their location, David was running scans on the environmental systems, while Zalera observed with professional interest. Chief Chen. Captain Torres entered the pod, followed by 2 security officers. We detected unauthorized activity in this section. Routine inspection, Captain, David replied smoothly. Dr. Zalera requested to observe our maintenance protocols for her research. Torres looked around the pod, noting the equipment and modified atmosphere. This area has been sealed for 2 years, which is exactly why it needed inspection. Been getting intermittent readings from the environmental systems here. Dr. Zalera's expertise in xenobiology has been helpful in determining whether the atmospheric modifications are safe. Zalera nodded seriously. The biocompatibility of sealed environments is crucial for station safety, Captain. Chief Chen has been very thorough in his explanations. Torres didn't look entirely convinced, but David's reputation and authority carried weight. In the future, Chief, please log these inspections with security. We can't have unauthorized personnel in sealed areas without proper notification, of course, Captain. I'll make sure all protocols are followed. After the security team left, David and Zalera stood in silence for several minutes, the weight of how close they'd come to discovery settling over them. That was too close, Zalera said finally. It was. Which means we can't continue meeting like this. So what do we do? David looked at her, this extraordinary woman who had turned his world upside down, who was offering him a future he'd never imagined. We find another way. But first, I need to understand exactly what we're risking. What do you mean? The authorization you mentioned. What would happen if we bonded without it? Zalera was quiet for a long moment. For me, exile from my home world. For you, potential criminal charges and permanent separation from human society. For both of us, a life lived in the shadows, always hiding what we've become. And if we don't bond, you return to your life. I complete my assignment and leave. We both spend the rest of our lives wondering what might have been. David studied her face, seeing the pain she was trying to hide. There has to be another option. There is, she said quietly, but it's dangerous, tell me. We complete the bonding in secret, then reveal it as an accomplished fact. Once the bond is complete, it can't be undone. Both governments would have to accept it and deal with the political consequences. That's a huge risk. Everything worthwhile is risky, David. The question is whether what we could have together is worth the risk of losing everything we have now. As they prepared to leave the pod, David realized that his decision was already made. He was going to risk everything for this alien woman who had captured his heart and offered him a future beyond his wildest dreams. The only question now was whether they could complete the bonding before the authorities discovered their secret. The point of no return, 3 days passed before David and Zalera could meet again safely. The heightened security patrols made their usual hiding places too dangerous, forcing them to communicate through carefully coded messages embedded in routine work reports. David found concentration nearly impossible. Every moment away from Zalera felt like losing pieces of himself. The partial connection they'd established was having unexpected effects on his physiology. His senses were sharper, colors more vivid, and he could detect sense and emotional resonances he'd never noticed before. The most disturbing change was his dreams. Each night brought visions of Zalera, Not just romantic fantasies, but shared experiences that felt absolutely real. He would wake with the taste of her kiss on his lips and the echo of her thoughts in his mind. On the third night, he woke to find his skin glowing with faint patterns similar to Zalera's bioluminescence. The realization sent him rushing to his Zalera's accent bathroom mirror, where he stared at the alien markings spreading across his chest and arms. His cum unit chimed with an emergency message: "Meet me in Cargo Bay 7. Maintenance shift. Level 3 access. Come alone. The changes have begun." David dressed quickly, his mind racing. If the bonding process was affecting him this dramatically already, what was happening to Zylora? Cargo Bay 7 was one of the few areas of the station with minimal surveillance, used primarily for storing non-essential supplies. David found Zalera waiting among the storage containers. But she was dramatically different from the shy researcher he'd first encountered. Her skin blazed with intricate patterns that seemed to shift and flow across her body like living art. Her eyes had become more luminous, casting actual light in the dim cargo bay. Most striking of all, she moved with a predatory grace that spoke of barely contained power. "David," she breathed, and her voice carried harmonics that resonated in his bones. "The partial bonding is accelerating beyond normal parameters. Can see that? Look at this." He showed her the glowing patterns on his own skin. Her eyes widened as she examined the markings. "This shouldn't be happening so quickly. Humans aren't supposed to show bioluminescent responses until at least the 5th stage of bonding. What does it mean? It means we're more compatible than I ever imagined. It also means we're running out of time." She moved closer, and David felt the now familiar rush of shared sensation. Changes will become visible to others soon. "We need to complete the bonding process within the next few hours, or we'll be discovered before we can finish." "Hours? I thought you said we could take as long as we needed." "That was before our bodies began adapting so rapidly." "Look at yourself, David. Really look." David examined his reflection in a nearby metal panel and was shocked by what he saw. The bioluminescent patterns were only the beginning. His features had become more refined, his posture more graceful. Even his hair seemed different, with subtle, iridescent qualities that caught the light. "I'm changing into something else entirely, not something else, something more." The bonding process enhances the best qualities of both partners. You're becoming the optimal version of yourself, modified by the connection we share in you. Zalera's smile was radiant and predatory. "I'm becoming something my species has never seen before. Modified by human qualities. Stronger, more adaptable, more emotionally complex." She was right. Even her personality seemed different. More confident and assertive than the shy researcher who had hidden in maintenance corridors. So what happens now? Now we make the final choice. Complete the bonding and accept the consequences, or find a way to reverse the process before it's too late. Can it be reversed? Theoretically, but the process would be extremely dangerous for both of us, and there's no guarantee we'd survive it unchanged. David studied her face, noting how the bioluminescent patterns seemed to respond to her emotions. "What do you want to do? Want to complete what we started? Want to bond with you completely and spend the rest of our extended lives together, regardless of the political consequences, even if it means exile from both our peoples? Even then, what we have together is worth more than the approval of governments that don't understand what we're becoming." David felt the truth of her words resonate through their partial connection. The bond they were forming wasn't just romantic or sexual, it was evolutionary, transforming them into something neither species had achieved alone. "Then let's finish this." The bonding ritual. Zalera led him to a section of the cargo bay she'd prepared with the same careful attention she'd shown in her hidden chamber. Bioluminescent panels created a circle of soft light, while small devices he didn't recognize hummed with gentle energy. "The final stages of bonding must be conducted with complete honesty and vulnerability," she explained, her voice taking on a ritual cadence. "We'll share not just our bodies, but our life forces, our memories, our very essence. What do I need to do? Trust me completely. Open yourself to sensations and experiences beyond anything you've known. And remember that whatever happens, we're doing this together." She began removing her clothing with graceful, deliberate movements. Skin blazed brighter as more of it was exposed, creating patterns that seemed to tell the story of her life and her love for him.